Hey, seventh grade. We're talking about The Outsiders, and we're doing the three chapters 4, 5, and 6. Okay, so chapter 4 picks back up because I know it's been a while. Because remember, chapter 3, you have Johnny and Pony out at the park, and it basically kind of foreshadows at the end of chapter 3 that they didn't think the night could get much worse, but then it does. Okay, so they're at the park. It's really cold outside. It's late. Nobody's out. And then they see the blue Mustang. And immediately, you know who that is. Johnny and Ponyboy know who that is. And it says 5 socias get out. Okay. Just like it always happens, there's always more socias when they jump greasers. So Johnny is immediately freaking out because these are the same guys that beat him up before. And for him, it's like it's just going to happen all over again. So it says that Pony sees him and he sees his face, and then he looks at him and he's got his switchblade in his back pocket that he carries ever since he was beaten up so badly. And so, as far as Ponyboy, he knows Johnny is freaking out. Okay. So you have Randy and Bob and the Socias, and basically they want to get back at them because they were with their girls. Okay. So they decide to give Ponyboy a bath, as they call it, in the fountain at the park. And you get Ponyboy's thoughts, and basically it gets to the point where they're holding him under so long that he's going to drown. He can't breathe. And then it says, a red haze filled my mind, and I slowly relaxed. It says, the next thing he knew, he was waking up, he was on the ground, and he was gasping, and then he sees Johnny's face. And he's green, he looks awful, and then he finds out what happened. And all all Johnny can say is, I killed the boy. I killed that boy. He's in shock. And then, of course, when Pony sees Bob, who is Cherry's boyfriend, he immediately goes and gets sick. So here you have, out of the Greasers group, which really most of the Greasers group would never be caught up in something like, I mean, Dally might, but the rest of them won't. And even out of that group, these two are the least likely to get in trouble at all. And then here you have them, and it was self defense, but they're caught up in something that you wouldn't imagine these two being caught up in, and that's a dead social Bob. And of course, Johnny, and he says it several times in here, it was self defense. He couldn't let his best friend die, but for him, it was the only way to save Pony because there was no way because those socials had been drinking that he was going to get them to quit what they were doing to Pony in the fountain. So at this point, they freak out and they have to figure out what they're going to do. So, just like I said, out of their group, the only one who would know how to deal with this situation because he's been in so many terrible situations is Dally. So that's where they go to. So Dally's staying over at Buck Merrill's place. They're pretty tight. Okay. And so when Dally gets them in and finds out what they've done, of course, he's not sad about what happened to Bob. He's never sad about anything, really. And he tells them what they can do. So he gives them money, he gives them a gun, and he tells them to hop a train to Windrixville and then find Jay Mountain where the church is. So, as far as Dally, I mean, he's not necessarily sad about Bob, but when he's talking to Johnny and Pony, what you can tell he's bothered by is, he doesn't want Johnny to become like him. And then for Pony, he's like, do your brothers know? I don't want to be the one to tell him because he knows how much they care about Pony. Those are the things that Dally's really worried about, not necessarily Bob. So he gets, of course, Pony some new clothes so he doesn't get sick. There's another little tender spot in there. And they leave, and in here it also says they go to Dally because they know Dally won't tell. Okay. So the boys leave, they get on the train, they're at Windrixville, and they make it and they hop off. But of course, they don't know where Jay Mountain is. So they have to figure out a way to do that. And in this moment, they're like, well, we got to go ask somebody. And then they're like, well, we don't look like farm kids. And then for an instant, you have Pony look at Johnny like a stranger would. And he said, as far as Johnny, and I mean, he applies this to himself. Um, he realizes how they can have the reputation that they do, that people are afraid of them because he looks and he's like, yeah, we look kind of rough. We don't look, he's like, we need haircuts and we need to be cleaned and we need nice clothes because I mean, now I understand why people look at us and then think we're no good. We kind of look like that. And so eventually you have Pony Boy go and figure out, he asks a farmer where Blue, or not Blue, Jay Mountain is. I want to say Blue Jay, like the bird. And they figure it out and they get to the abandoned church that's there. Okay. And as far as being in the country and things like that, you can tell that Pony's he's very comfortable with it because he went all the time when his parents were alive. And so this bit as he's walking to find somebody to talk to, his mind starts racing to that. And then of course, it's inevitable. His mind starts racing like maybe this is a dream. Maybe this didn't really happen. And of course, if you were in a situation like that, that's where your mind would go, this can't be real. This can't happen to me. So once they get up to Jay Mountain, they walk in and it's pretty creepy, okay? And you have this last little section in that chapter where Pony talks about as far as being in church, he was in church all the time when his parents were alive. And he also says that he and Johnny, even after Pony's parents were killed, they liked to go to church and they enjoyed it. And it says they always sat in the back because they didn't have nice clothes. But it says they always paid attention to the sermon and always tried to get things out of it. And it said the last time they went, they brought Steve and Two Bit and all of them. And of course, they embarrassed them, so they haven't been back since. But as far as being in a church, Pony and Johnny, the reason this is in there is they feel comfortable. They've always gone. But this is the reason why it's in here. At the end, it says, or Ponyboy says, this church gave him a creepy feeling. He says, what do you call it? Premonition. So it's like even when he walks in this church, there's something that makes him feel uneasy, which is a bit of foreshadowing for you for later chapters. So, chapter 5, they wake up. Well, Pony wakes up, and it's kind of like he wakes up and because he's in a if you've ever done this, like you spend the night at somebody's house, you sleep and you wake up and you almost kind of forget where you are. And that's how he feels. He almost kind of forgets where he is. He expects his brothers to come in and they'll eat and he gets up and eats breakfast and goes and plays football with the gang and all that kind of stuff. And so he kind of realizes where he is and makes himself get up and he realizes Johnny's not there and that he's gone to get supplies. So eventually Johnny comes back with food and he brings back a book, Gone with the Wind. And so Johnny remembers, and this is how you get throughout all of this, you can tell that these two are really tight. So Johnny remembers that he wanted a copy of that book. They had gone to see the movie together, so he was hoping Pony can read it to him. So in his supplies, you have him buy some bleach, and this is where they kind of change their looks, disguise themselves. So for Johnny, he just cuts his hair because it's so dark he can't bleach it. And then Pony cuts and bleaches his hair. And of course, when he's sitting there and he kind of sees himself, he gets upset. But it's not that he's really upset about the um the hair. It's just this whole situation. So you have this scene where Pony and Johnny kind of get in a shouting match at one another. And it's not that they're mad at one another, they're just so overwhelmed with the situation that they're in. It's something out of their control and they don't know what to do. And so they shout at each other, they cry, they're upset. And then it's kind of like they get all that emotion out and then they're fine. So it says, you have this little break and it says, the next 4 or 5 days were the longest days I've ever spent in my life. So they play cards and they read Gone with the Wind, and then you have them talk about how Johnny loves that book and he loves the idea of the Southern gentleman. He loves their manners, their charm, their humor, and then it uses this word gallant. And he says, they remind me of Dally. And Pony's like, "Pfft, are you kidding? Like, he has no charm. He's not nice. He has no manners. And for Johnny, he's like, yeah, you're right, but I watched him get in trouble with the police for something he didn't do, but he didn't rat anyone out. He just took the blame. And he's like, that's gallant. And that's when Pony, it says, realizes how much Johnny adores and looks up to Dally. Like he had no clue. Because for Pony, he does not. He says that Dally is so real that he's scared of him. But for Johnny, he looks past the scary part because he is scary, but he sees that point where he knows Dally will always be there for him and he will always have his back and always stand up for him. That's what Johnny adores about Dally. That's how their relationship is different because, I mean, Johnny's parents don't care. So, Dally is that's how he looks at Dally. Yes, he does the terrible things, but he's that one person that for Johnny will always have his back and always care about him. So, you have them talk about the book a little bit, and then there's this morning where they get up early and they see the sunrise, and it's beautiful. Um, in the city, it's not the same. So out in the country, they see this beautiful sunrise, and then you have Ponyboy quote this Robert Frost poem, which is in here more than once. Okay, and it says, nature's first green is gold, her heart is hue to hold. Her early leaves a flower, but only so an hour. Then leaf subsides to leaf, so Eden sank to grief. So dawn goes down to day, nothing gold can stay. And Johnny's like, what is that? And he tells him it's a poem, and Pony's like, I always remember it, but I'm not sure what it means. And for Johnny, he kind of talks about that in a couple of chapters later. So hold on to that. I'll talk about it in once we get to that section in the book. So for Johnny, he's just enjoying things that he's never really paid attention to before. He's like, I never noticed colors and clouds and stuff until you tell me about them. So you can see that these two, and we even talk about this in here, like Cherry, um, they have different things that they enjoy versus the rest of the group. Because Johnny talked about Pony's family that Soda looks like his mom but acts like his dad. Derry looks like his dad but acts like his mom, and there's Pony who doesn't act like either one. And then he's like, he goes, yeah, that's true. Pony says that. And then he talks about, well, I could never talk about poems with the rest of the group, but I could talk to him maybe, with you and then Cherry, of course. And so they're just talking about how people are so different. All people are different, but then they think about Cherry and they're like, but maybe we're not all that different. So they keep talking about reading the book, and they get to the point with the Civil War and all that kind of stuff in Gone with the Wind. And through that little section, you eventually get to the part where Dally comes to visit. So, of course, they're so excited to see him. And Dally looks at him and, of course, notices their hair. Then he also notices that they're pale, they don't look good, they're really thin. And he brings a letter with them from Soda. So remember, Derry has no clue where they are, but Soda figured it out. Okay, he sees a clue, if you will. And so you have this little letter from Ponyboy, um, or to Ponyboy from Soda. Sorry, y'all. And you find out Dally gets hauled into the station as far as getting questions asked, and of course he doesn't tell anybody. But Soda reiterates how hard Derry is taking this. Like he feels like it's all his fault because remember, right before he ran off, that's when Derry hits him. And you have Soda in the letter by saying, I wish y'all would just turn yourselves in. Because of course he just wants to see both, not only Pony, but he wants to see both of them again. So in here you have Dally take them to go eat. And then on the way back, um, you have them talk about a lot of different things. Okay, so I'll start with this. You have Dally tell them that they have a spy, and you find out Cherry is the spy for the Greasers, telling them what's happening with the Socs because they're going to have that huge rumble. Okay, so you find that out, and you also find out that Cherry is willing to testify that it was all self-defense, that Bob and the Socs had been drinking and they were looking for a fight, and that they were trying to kill them. Like, she's willing to say all of that. So Johnny and them aren't Johnny and Pony aren't looked at as murderers. Okay. And you also find out in this little section on the way back that Johnny he's just decided to turn himself. Let's go back. I want to turn myself in. You just said it. Cherry will vouch for me. I'll get off with a lighter sentence. Because for Johnny can't live like this anymore. He just can't do it. And really, Pony can't either. So Dally talks about how for Pony, his brothers are so worried about him. And then, of course, that leads Johnny to ask about his parents. And he wants to know if they're worried about him. And of course, they aren't. And for Dally, he just blurts it out. He's like, no, they don't care, Johnny. Uh, why do you care about them? The group cares about you. Who cares about your parents? And in this little moment, you have Pony talks about Dally and he says, I felt sorry for Dally. He meant it when he said he didn't care about his parents. So you have Dally basically because he's been alone for so long, he's basically built all these walls around him. And because those people who are supposed to care about him didn't, that's why you have a 10-year-old Dally in the streets of New York already in jail. I mean, a 10-year-old in jail. And so he's learned to basically harden himself against everything. Okay. And it says Dolly could take it. Dolly was of the breed that could take anything because he was hard and tough. And when he wasn't, he could turn hard and tough. So he's learned how to harden himself against the world and not let things bother him, or at least make it appear that way. Johnny's not like that. Okay. Like, not in the slightest. And so that's why Dally, that's another reason why Dally has such a soft spot for Johnny. Um, and then you have this little section where Dally realizes his words, although Dally doesn't care about whether his parents care about him, he knows Johnny does. And then you have this little section where Dally kind of, you know, ruffles Johnny's hair, and Pony's watching this like, I've never seen this. And so he says, I'm not mad at you, Johnny. I just don't want you to get hurt. I don't want you to become like me. And for Pony, he's just staring like Dally never talked like that. So he could see in this moment how tight their relationship really is. And when I say they, I mean Dally and Johnny. Okay. So they're heading back to get their stuff because they're going to go back to town with Dally. And then here's where you have the church fire. And immediately Johnny goes, it must have been us. We must have had a cigarette that we didn't put out properly. And so immediately when Johnny says that, Johnny and Pony immediately run into the church, and of course Dolly's angry at them for doing that. So Johnny and Pony get inside and they find the kids, and you have this little section where Pony says he's never seen Johnny like that, and it says he wasn't scared either. That was the only time I can think of when I saw him without that defeated look, suspicious look in his eyes. He looked like he was having the time of his life. Um, and immediately your mind should go back to Gone with the Wind and the Southern gentleman with manners and charm and being gallant. That's what Johnny longs to be. And in this moment, he's not scared because this is when he gets to be that. So they get all the kids out and the roof's about to collapse. So Johnny pushes Pony out the window, and then there's the crash behind him, and Johnny screams, and Pony passes out right after Dally hits him on the back, and he has no idea why. And so when he wakes up, he's in the ambulance with the older gentleman that was there at the church with the kids, Jerry, and then Dally and Johnny are in an ambulance behind him. And so they're taking him to the hospital, and Jerry and Mrs. O'Brien, who's the other teacher that was there, just think they're the greatest. Those boys are the greatest things ever. They're heroes. They're wonderful. And for Pony, he's like, no, we're just greasers. Like, we're really not that great. And this is where you see that idea of just because you look a certain way or you come from a certain way, it doesn't mean you always have to be that way. And that's what Jerry's kind of showing him. Like, he has no idea what their past is, but he knows what their actions tell him. And for Jerry, he thinks these kids are heroes. So they're heading towards the hospital. And as far as Jerry, he tells Pony that, he thinks Dally will be pretty good. He's just burned on one arm pretty badly, but he said Johnny, he's not sure. It was pretty bad with him that a piece of timber fell across his back and it could have broken it. So when you have this little space, and the last little section is they're at the hospital. So they roll Dally and Johnny past Pony, and he can tell Dally's okay. He answers him, but when he sees Johnny, he knows it's bad. So um, you have Jerry tell him there's a couple of people there to see Pony, and of course, you know who it is. It's his brothers. So, of course, Soda runs in and hugs him and all of that. And then you have Derry. And Pony looks at him, and it says his fists were jammed in his pockets and his eyes were pleading. And then he realizes that he's crying. And it makes Pony think back to the time when their parents died. And Derry has that exact same look. And so in that moment, it kind of dawns on him what everybody's been trying to tell him about Derry. Although Derry doesn't say things exactly it's kind of like he says things to him, and you have this little section where it says, when he yelled, Pony, where have you been all this time? He meant, Pony, you've scared me to death. Please be careful because I couldn't stand if anything happened to you. So he might not say things exactly the way he means them, but Pony realizes all that Derry is worried about is losing him. He doesn't want to lose him like he lost his parents. So he's over the top protective because not that he dislikes him, but he loves him so much. And then, of course, in that moment, Pony realizes that and forgives him. And of course, they hug and all that kind of stuff. And it's kind of, he says, I knew it was going to be okay because I was home to stay. And he realizes that both of his brothers love him, and and even more so Derry, way more than he ever expected them to be. And those are your 3 chapters.